I'm back with this 2021 Tesla Model 3, and while I'm putting on my summer tires today, I'm going to be doing some annual maintenance, and I've also got some rust concerns that I wanted to look into. So I figured I would just take you along and show you what I'm doing. Here are a bunch of timestamps to the things I'm going to cover in this video. I've also added chapters, so if your device supports that, feel free to use those to skip ahead. Now, one of the first things that I wanted to call out was the idea that Teslas don't rust because the body panels are made out of aluminum. And I know that aluminum can eventually start to pit, but it's a lot more resistant to corrosion than steel is. So I've got a magnet here. I just wanted to see if I could test this theory. So if I check the hood is not magnetic, so the hood is made out of aluminum. If I check over here, this door, the door is not magnetic, the doors are aluminum. But if I check this fender here, we can see that the fender is magnetic. So I would expect that the fender is made out of something that can rust. And so we're going to do a little bit of a test later on in this video. We're actually going to see what these fenders are made out of. So stay tuned for that. One super common spot for cars to rust is right here on the back side of this fender, because you'll get sand and salt and other stuff that collects in this back part of this fender liner and just rests up against this metal and it starts to break it down. I got this tool from Harbor Freight. This is just push pin clip pliers. You can get these on Amazon too. I'll put a link in the description. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull these out and then this whole fender liner can come out. So here's one of these push pin clips. You can just use a screwdriver or whatever you want. I have these fancy these pliers here that can just pull it out like that. Makes easy work out of these. And there's one more bolt down here. Now this whole thing can just pull out. Now immediately you can see down here, there's just a whole bunch of dirt and sand that's just collecting in here. My concern is that all of this is going to just hold moisture up against this metal part here. So I'm going to see if I can clean all this up and figure out some way to protect this metal. So I'm just going to pull all this dirt here. So we've got this whole plastic piece here that's holding a whole bunch of dirt too. So I'm just going to get the air gun and see if we can get it out that way. So I've got this mostly cleaned up now. It looks like most of the dirt was not against the fender, but actually against like this rocker panel down here. But it looks like this rocker panel is also magnetic, and so my concerns remain the same. I'm a big fan of fluid film. There's a couple other videos that show that this is pretty effective for preventing rust. It also is pretty good at self-healing since it's made out of wax. And so anything that chips off, it'll eventually kind of mold back together and continue to protect. So I'm just going to be super liberal with this and get this all over everything in here to prevent any of this from rusting. I experimented on the passenger side here by just removing the one bolt from the bottom and these two push pins here, and I am able to actually remove this here just like this, and I can get access here to clean this out and spray it. So that means you don't need to take off the entire fender liner. And if you turn this wheel, you can even get into here without even jacking up the car. Now another super common spot for rust is the rocker panels. On Tesla, there's this plastic cover. I tried removing that and I didn't see any causes for concern in there. Next, I'm going to be doing some annual maintenance on these brakes, just like Tesla calls out in their owner's manual. And so basically, I'm going to pop out these two pins, I'm going to take the pads out, and I'm going to get those cleaned up. I just got this little punch and a hammer. Just going to pound these out. And now I can just walk these brake pads out. So what I'm going to end up doing is just cleaning up the sides of these pads where it rubs up against the side of the caliper, just to make sure everything slides real nice and smooth so they don't actually get stuck in this path here. I've got both sides of the pad and the part that rests against the little spring both all cleaned up. And I've got these little pins all cleaned up. Now you don't want to use compressed air to clean out this caliper because you don't want to be breathing in all of that brake dust or getting it in your eyes or whatever. And so I like to use something called brake clean. It's just evaporates crazy quick. And so I'm just going to spray this in here and get this caliper all cleaned up. And now I've got some brake parts lubricant. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to touch all of the spots on here that were a little bit rusty. And I'm just going to make sure that they can slide inside real easily. Now I can slide them back into the car. Come on, here we go. You do the same with these pins, just get a little bit of lubrication on these just to keep these so they don't get stuck for next time. And now we can go ahead and start getting these pins back in place. You might need a screwdriver or something to get these things lined up. We're going to take our spring and get this mostly in place. Now we can do the same for the other side. Push our spring back in. If it needs a little help, you can just take a hammer and just get it started. We'll take our screwdriver, line up this other hole, and we're all set. I've got some wheel chucks here that I put under the front wheels. And then under the service menu, I'm going to go in the tow mode here. That'll disengage the back brakes. Now we're going to take off the back wheel and we're going to look under there. I can go ahead and slide this red tab back, and now I can push down this little tab here, which will let me push off this connector. Now I can go ahead and remove this back caliper bolt and the bottom one. I've got a bungee strap ready. There's just a little hole up here I'm going to hook into. I'm going to leave this here for a second. Now I can go ahead and just take a screwdriver, get this caliper started out. And now I can just find a way to rig this up, something like that. Make sure you don't have any tension on this brake line here. And now you have access to these brake pads here, so I can just pull these brake pads out. And now the idea is I'm going to clean up the tabs around this side of the brake pad here and on the inside here, just to make sure that the pad can slide in and out easily. And I'm also going to do it for the inside pad. You'll want to examine the hardware too to see if this needs to get replaced. This little spring here should push the pads away from the rotor so that they don't drag and you'll get better range. If these are worn out, then you're going to want to replace these. And similar to before, I'm going to get a little bit of this grease on the outside of this pad. If it's lubricated properly, then you should be able to push on it and have it spring back. We'll do the same on the inside. You should also take a minute to make sure that your caliper pins slide in and out real smoothly. Now we can go ahead and put the caliper back on. And make sure you reattach your electronics here and make sure this red tab is slid in this way. I'm going to do the same check and remove the fender liner from this back part here to see if there are any rust concerns under here. So looking around here with this fender liner removed, everything looks pretty clean. So I think we're all set there. I'm not too concerned about anything in here. Now another thing that I wanted to talk about was a loud bang that you might hear after you've left your car parked for a little bit. Here's what it sounds like. So what's happening there is the brake pads are actually rusting to the rotors. We can reproduce this by first putting the car into transport mode and then spraying some water in between the brake pad and the rotor. So transport mode just releases the parking brake, which Makes a little bit of space between the pad and the rotor so we can get water in there. And then once we turn off transport mode, it's essentially just simulating parking after driving in the rain and then letting the car sit for a few hours so rust can form. And you might think, well, this never happened on any other car that I've owned. And you might be right. In gasoline cars with automatic transmissions, if you put the car in park, there's a little pin that comes out and locks the transmission in place, which keeps the drive wheels from spinning so the car can't roll away. With Tesla, they don't have traditional transmissions, and so they don't have a pin that locks that transmission in place. So when you put a Tesla in park, the car engages parking brakes, which are just the back two brakes. The brake pads squeeze against the rotors, and sometimes they can actually rust into the rotor a little bit and they stick. When you're driving around non-EVs, you're using the brakes a lot and they get really hot, and that heat helps to evaporate any moisture that gets on there so they stay dry. When you drive a Tesla, however, you're using regenerative braking a lot, which means that your brakes don't get hot and they stay wet. Now the good news is it's not really a cause for concern, and Tesla's owner's manual even calls this out as a normal operating sound. That being said, I wanted to see if I could figure out a way to stop it. And so I found these ceramic brake pads. Now ceramic brake pads have a lot less metal in them, and so my hope is that these won't rust to the rotors the way the regular pads will. But we're gonna test that. Now, if you're doing the brake maintenance anyway, this is a perfect time to install these. It's just a couple extra steps and you're good to go. So I'm going to show you how to install these quick. So I've already showed you how to get this far, and to get these pads off, I've got my caliper already hung up. And you can see down here, I've got my new pads and my old pads. Now you'll notice on these new pads, 2 of them have these little metal squealers and 2 of them do not. So these are designed as they wear down. If this metal ends up touching onto this rotor, it's going to make a squealing sound and you'll know that your brake pads are worn. Now you'll notice I've marked these. This is the inside pad and this is the outside pad that I took off the car. The inside pad has the squealer, and you'll notice that as it's installed, that squealer is on the leading edge. So this is the driver's side wheel. This rotor is going to be spinning this way. So the bottom is actually the leading edge. So as the car is driving, the rotor is spinning this way. It's going to push this squealer towards the pad. That's how these are designed to work. And so if you found that confusing, then just keep in mind when you take these off, pay attention to which of these has the squealer and the orientation of them, and make sure that your new pads match how they came out of the car. So just like before, I'm going to get a little bit of lubrication onto the tabs of this brake pad. And now I'm going to slide it into the caliper holder. And now I'm going to take one without the squealer on it, put that on the outside. Now if you want, you can also grease the back of the pads, but you don't need to grease the entire thing. On this outside pad, you can just do these outside edges where it's actually touching against this part of the caliper. And on the inside one, you can just do it where the piston is rubbing on the inside of the pad. Now, as your brake pads wear down, they get thinner, which means that your caliper piston needs to extend further in order to apply the pressure to the pads. So that means that when we put in new pads that are thicker, we need to push this piston back in to make room for our now thicker pads. So the first thing you should do is pop the cap off of your brake fluid reservoir, so when we push this piston back in, there's a place for the fluid to go. Next, if you look in the Model 3 service manual, it just says to use a caliper spreader tool to push this piston back in. Now, I tried to push this piston back in with a caliper spreader tool and I couldn't get it to budge. Some people say that you can enable service mode in the car and go into an electronic parking brake service mode, and I tried that as well and I still couldn't push this back in. So the way that I figured out to do this is to remove the electronic parking brake altogether, and we can squeeze it back in. So let me show you that. On the back of the caliper, this is your electronic parking brake, and there's 2 Allen screws, one here and one here. I'm going to remove these. So you can see this hole here now. It's kind of annoying. I don't have a bit that will match this. I think this is actually like a 7mm triple square, but my kit goes from M6 to M8, but I did find that a 6mm Allen head will work in that hole. To be thorough, I ended up buying an M7 bit, but even this was too small compared to this, so this doesn't work. I don't know what it actually is, but this 6mm Allen will work for the job. So I've got my caliper spreader installed in here. I've got my Allen screw in here. And now what I'm going to do is just turn this and try to back this piston out. So I'm turning this back screw to the right as far as it'll go, and that lets me push my piston all the way back in. So now this piston is pushed all the way back in, and I've got room for my new pads. So the pads did come with new hardware, but both of these springs are still in really good shape. I don't have any concerns with these, so I'm going to leave these in, and I can just install these new pads. And again, just check to make sure that these spring back, and you'll know that you're properly lubricated. You can see a little bit of dirt and crap on this little O-ring that's on here, so I'm going to take this off and I'm going to get this cleaned up. And also the screws that came out of the parking brake are a little bit gross. I'm going to get these cleaned up and put some never sees on these. Now I can go ahead and reinstall the parking brake. And now we can reinstall our caliper. I've got both caliper bolts back in, and now I can just reconnect my parking brake electronics. So now we're going to put our wheel back on. We're going to jack up and do the other side. We'll put our brake fluid reservoir cap back on, and then there's one more step before we're all done. Now this isn't really Tesla related, but when you're done with a brake job, your hands just get absolutely disgusting. And I've tried like the orange pumice soaps, I've tried a whole bunch like dish soap, but I found this product called Tub of Towels, and no, I'm not sponsored in any way. These guys are just awesome. So I'm just gonna clean my hands with this live on camera to show you there's no tricks. I'm gonna do like a before and after so you can see how good this stuff works. So now you can see an after, my hands are essentially just as if I hadn't been doing brake work at all. And that's just from one wipe in, what was that, like a minute and a half or something. So these things are just amazing. I don't even have to rinse. They've got something in them that makes my hands feel nice and soft. And so, yeah, if you want to get your hands super clean, these things are just awesome to keep in the garage. So I've made sure that the brake reservoir cap is back on. Everything's back together. I've pumped the brakes slowly until I got a normal feel, turned off transport mode. And now I'm going to come in here, I'm going to go to the software menu, and I'm going to hold down model for a couple seconds. And you'll see it says, please enter access code. Now this isn't some kind of secret menu. All the service manuals are publicly available. You can just log in with your own Tesla account. The access code right now in 2024 is service. I'm going to say okay. And I am now in service mode. I'm going to go to the chassis menu here. I'm going to say brakes. And then there's a brake burnishing button right here. I'm going to tap this. And now it's going to actually walk me through how to burnish the brakes. Now the surface of the rotor is not completely smooth, and so this process helps mate the pad to the rotor to optimize stopping power. So the car is going to ask you to speed up to 46 miles an hour and then slow down fairly quickly 9 times in a row. So you're going to want to find a road somewhere that has a high speed limit, but also has hardly any traffic at all, so that you can safely do this. It now says process completed, so we can stop the guided process. Once you're done with all 9 stops, you can exit service mode, and we're all done. Now they say that if you replace your back pads, then you should replace your front pads as well so that they match. I'm not going to worry about it, but I thought it was worth mentioning. If this is something that you want to do, then you're going to have the front pads out anyway, so now's the time to do it. So I've got the ceramic brakes on, and now one more time I'm going to get the brake pads wet, and we'll let it sit overnight. So I've left the car parked overnight. Now I've got the ceramic brakes on. We're going to see if they stick. No sound at all. Amazing. Now you might have noticed when I was working on the brakes that there's quite a bit of surface rust on the rotors themselves. When you're driving around non-EVs, every time you hit the brakes, the pads are scraping some of that rust off. When you're driving around EVs, however, regenerative braking doesn't use friction braking. And so it's a good idea every now and then to turn off regenerative braking and use your brakes. Now on non-EVs, if you shift it into neutral, you're actually shifting into a special mode in the transmission where the gears aren't engaged. With Tesla, they're just kind of using that term for familiarity, but when you put the car in neutral, what you're actually doing is just disabling regenerative braking. So I'm going to find a nice steep hill, I'm going to turn off regenerative braking, and then I'm just going to use my brakes for a while, trying to get all of that surface rust off of my rotors. So I found a hill. You can see it's regenerating like crazy right now. If I just hold up on this, I'm now in neutral, which means that it's not regenerating. And so if I use my brakes now, I'm really going to be cleaning up my rotors. You can really feel how heavy the car is. Depending on how you drive and how often you drive, it's up to you how often you want to do this. I would suggest at least yearly, if not monthly or more. Now, if you work for Tesla or you know somebody that works for Tesla, I would love to see this automated with software. You already have the ability to simulate regenerative braking when the battery's either too cold or too full to take a charge. I would love to see this automatically done based on how often the user uses friction braking. At the very least, it would be awesome if you would at least offer a friction brake maintenance mode or something where you can drive around without regenerative braking for a little bit just to clean up these rotors. So if I open up the hood and then just pull here to pop up this apron, you can immediately see this battery connection here. So right down in here, you can see a battery connection here, and then this just pops up here like this, so we can inspect both terminals here. I had a problem last year where this terminal corroded so badly it had a bad connection, and my car actually restarted on me one time after I parked. And so this is something that can be a big problem. It's a good thing to check these annually just to make sure that there aren't any corrosion issues here. If you want, it's probably not even a bad idea to occasionally take these off and treat them with some dielectric grease. So I just have a 10mm socket here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to loosen this up. And the same on the other side here. Now we can go ahead and pop this connector off. And the same over here. Now mine are already pretty clean, but if you need to clean yours up, you can use just a battery terminal wire brush. I'll just show you how to use this quick. This just slides on here, and you just kind of turn this until it gets all cleaned up. And they make drill versions of these too that might be interesting if you're doing this a lot. And then on the inside, it's got another brush that you can use to get the inside of these terminals. So I just have some dielectric grease here. I just squeeze this into a little tub so that I can use a little acid brush to apply it to stuff later on. Now that that's applied, we can just go ahead and put our terminals back on and tighten them down. Now we can go ahead and pop our protective cover back on, and then we can snap our apron back on. So I've just washed the car and I've found a bunch of little rust spots embedded in the paint. Now those seem concerning. You might think that they're actually part of the body, but they're not. In the detailing world, these little things are known as fallout. And so if you Google fallout for cars, you'll find a lot of people say that it's from like rail yards where you have trains that are running on top of railroads. All the dust kicks up from that and settles on your car. In my opinion, it's actually almost exclusively brake dust. So you've got your brakes, even from your own car, when your brake pads rub against the rotor, it ends up releasing a lot of really hot dust, and that hot dust melts into the clear coat, and these little dots eventually start to rust. And if you have a white car, they really pop out, they really stand out, you notice them. On other cars, these will appear, but you don't really notice them as much because you don't have the contrast. Now, there are a bunch of different products out there that will remove this. This one's made by Adams, but they're all roughly the same. Basically, you just spray this onto the coat of your paint, let it sit for a few minutes, and it will actually react with these little rust spots, dissolve the iron, so that you can just rinse it off. Now, this isn't something that you want to do for every car wash. Really, I limit this to about once a year, but since this is an annual maintenance video, I thought I would include it. So I'm just going to spray this on the car and show you how it works, and we'll do a before and after. So now that it's been soaking for a bit, you can see all of these little spots. You can see they've been reacting with the spray that we put on there. They end up turning purple. At this point, we can now just rinse this off. And if you look up close one more time now, you can see there are no more little spots. I have maybe a slight one right here that I can probably do one more application with, but all of the rest have just kind of vanished. There's one more spot that I wanted to point out that's underneath this license plate holder. So I'm going to pull this off quick. So you can see straight from the factory, this is actually just kind of resting right up against the body of the car. It's going to leave a mark. Now that we took the plate off, you can see this stock holder. It just has 2 torque screws here that I'm going to remove. Now I've already cleaned it up quite a bit, and you can see down here, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but this area right here, I can actually feel it with my fingernail. On both sides here, we can see these marks right in the paint. That's where this plastic is actually rubbing against the actual paint on the car. And so I want to prevent this from wearing any further. I don't want this to get through the clear coat, or certainly not through the paint, because it could cause rust issues here. So you can see I just have some adhesive weather stripping here. What I'm going to do is just cut a couple small squares here, and I'm going to stick them right to the back of this license plate holder. You don't want to stick them to the car because it would be nice to be able to take this off and clean the car without any obstructions. I'm just going to stick one there and one here. Now we can go ahead and remount the license plate holder and the license plate itself. Now it's really hard to see, but the license plate is now sitting on top of these foam blocks, protecting the body of the car. So I wanted to be thorough and make sure that all of the work that we're doing here is actually worth the effort. And so I went down to EV Parts Guy right here in Rochester, New York, and he hooked me up with an entire fender off of a junk Model 3. He also hooked me up with a fender from a Model S. This one's already been chopped up, but it's going to do just fine for our purposes. I also managed to scrounge up a fender from a 2008 Subaru, and I've got this 1990s something Toyota. So my friend has access to a machine that will be able to scan these metals and tell us exactly what elements the metals are made out of. However, there's a bunch of paint and clear coat on these fenders that I want to clean off so that the machine is only scanning the metal and nothing else. So you can see here I've used this angle grinder and I've ground away quite a bit here. What I'm going to end up doing is just cutting out a square out of here so that it'll fit into his machine and we can get our results back. So my friend got back to me with the results, and unfortunately, it kind of just highlights that I'm new to this and I didn't prepare my surfaces properly. So if we look at the results, the Model S has a lot of aluminum in it like we expected, but he took 2 samples from the other fenders and it shows kind of a wild range of iron and zinc. Now I was expecting it to be a lot more consistent than that, but it sounds like the way that I was preparing the surfaces with my angle grinder and wire brush, I was just contaminating the heck out of it, And all of these manufacturers, they use zinc as a corrosion inhibitor. And it sounds like when I was trying to grind that off, a lot of it was actually just spreading deeper into the metal. Maybe I didn't get it off as well as I should have. At the end of the day, the results show that the Model 3 fender is not aluminum like the Model S is, and it also shows that it's pretty similar to the Subaru and Toyota fenders. And if that wasn't enough for you, on the back of this fender, we can see where rust has formed just in the 6 months or so since this car was in an accident. This little tab was pulled away and you can see all of the rust in here that's formed in just that time. So I think this is clear that if you have a Model 3 or a Model Y and the paint and the clear coat gets compromised, your fenders can rust. Now that's all I've got for this video. I'm curious if you guys want more longer form videos like this, or if you would prefer to have shorter videos more often. I know this one got to be pretty long, but there was a lot to cover and I figured it was all related, so I threw it together. I will put links in the description to the ceramic brakes that I used, iron remover, the brake lube, everything that I used in this video. I'll be sure to link in the description. If you use that, that helps out the channel, helps me make more videos like this in the future. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I hope you found this helpful.